The Washington Post says North Korea is a nuclear power and implies that future dialogue with the regime needs to start with this admission. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hello, welcome to Press Perspective. It's Monday, January 19th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we delve into the latest developments with regard to North Korea and efforts by South Korea to revive dialogue. For more on this, I have freelance journalist Raphael Rashid here in the studio. Raphael, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Professor Kim Jae-chun at Sogang University live on the line. Professor Kim, it's great to have you back.
Great to be here.
Right, Raphael, let's start in the studio. Let's begin then with the gist of the editorial by the Washington Post that was published this past Sunday, I believe, and its relevance, Raphael.
Yeah, so the Washington Post, they published this editorial over the weekend arguing that the Trump administration had quietly abandoned the goal of North Korean denuclearization, with the evidence found in what was notably absent from official policy documents. So the editorial points out that North Korea wasn't mentioned even once in the national security strategy released by the White House in December. And they say that this represents basically a shift from Trump's stance in 2017, when it's kind of a similar strategy paper stated emphatically that North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons poses a global threat that requires a global response, and committed the US to compel denuclearization on the peninsula. So words that we've heard before. The Post argues that this omission is basically something that is calculated and amounts to this tacit acknowledgement or admission that denuclearization is no longer realistic. So, of course, the current estimates are that North Korea does possess up to maybe 50 assembled nuclear warheads and has the capacity to maybe even build another 40. So this editorial suggests that if Washington is ready to shift its posture for denuclearization to what it terms freeze and cap, basically limiting the current arsenal rather than kind of eliminating it altogether, then the administration should basically admit it, acknowledge that this is what they're pursuing openly, and also acknowledge the risks and coordinate with allies with this reality. Of course, the relevance of this extends beyond the US. We look at China's most recent arms control white paper released, I think it was a few weeks ago in November. They also omitted any reference to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which is wording, language that we had been used to in the past. So I think this puts Seoul a bit in an awkward position when it comes to, on the one hand, pursuing denuclearization, whilst its main partners have quietly moved on or moved towards acceptance. So now we have a bit of a reality gap, and I think Seoul is going to have to take this into consideration when it comes to future kind of diplomatic calculations.
Right, and against this backdrop, Professor Kim, what are your takeaways with regard to this editorial and its broader implications?
Well, as Raphael just mentioned, the editorial basically says North Korea is a nuclear state, and there's no denying that. You can try to deny that, but that doesn't change the reality. And the piece also suggests that policymakers should move away from the idea of denuclearization and instead focus more on managing the risks of a nuclear-armed North Korea, mainly through deterrence. Now, my takeaway is a bit mixed. I agree that North Korea is in practice a nuclear weapon state, and it's going to be extremely difficult, maybe impossible, to roll that back. But at the same time, didn't we already know this? I mean, this isn't new information. We all know that North Korea is a de facto nuclear state. So the real question is, do we just give up on the goal of complete denuclearization. And I don't think we should. We have to keep saying that our ultimate objective is CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, even if it's really difficult to achieve this objective. Because if we start formally acknowledging North Korea as a nuclear weapon state, which basically means lifting sanctions and treating them like a normal state, that'll give North Korea a huge strategic advantage over South Korea. And then frankly, many here would then argue that we need nuclear weapons of our own. So yes, we need a more realistic approach to deal with North Koreans. And I think we are doing exactly that. But at the same time, we can't abandon the long-term objective of denuclearization. So that balance is going to be very, very important here.
All right. Well, the commitment to denuclearization was yet again reaffirmed, that is, by the Lee administration earlier on this Monday after his summit talks with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Meanwhile, Raphael, North Korea last week accused South Korea of drone incursions. What exactly did the regime say?
Yes, North Korea's military has accused South Korea of flying surveillance drones into its airspace on 2 occasions with stern warnings about consequences. According to a statement from the General Staff of the Korean People's Army in North Korea last week, North Korean forces say that they detected and brought down a South Korean drone on the 4th of January. The drone allegedly entered from Ganghwa province in Incheon, penetrating approximately 8 kilometers into North Korea, into the territory, and was apparently forced down somewhere near Kaesong. Pyongyang claims that the recovered drone was programmed to fly 156 kilometers over 3 hours, recording major sites, military sites in North Korea. There were 2 cameras on board. Apparently, they captured almost 7 minutes of footage. The regime also revealed that apparently there was a similar incident that occurred last September as well. Another drone had apparently infiltrated and crashed. Again, this one had recorded apparently a few hours of footage and flew across Panmunjom and Kaesong, the former industrial complex, and military posts near the border. So the General Staff statement basically suggests that these launches couldn't have occurred without military knowledge in South Korea, and they warned that the ROK military warmongers will surely be forced to pay a dear price for their unpardonable hysteria. So very strong words coming out of North Korea, and I don't think this kind of statement would come out unless they had some form of evidence. And, I don't think they would have just invented it out of the blue. So very strong words coming out from Pyongyang and very clearly very strong allegations.
That being said, then what has been the response from the government here in South Korea?
Yeah, so there have been multiple responses here in South Korea. The government basically has firmly denied military involvement of any kind. The Ministry of National Defense stated that initial investigations found that the military does not possess these drones that North Korea has been showing on their media, this type of drone. They said, we don't have it. And also, besides, on those days that you mentioned, we did not use any drones of any kind. So they've basically denied it. But Seoul did acknowledge the possibility of civilian involvement. President Lee Jae-myung escalated the response by ordering the formation of a joint police and military joint task force to investigate this. And in a statement from the presidential office, Lee did direct that if civilian involvement is found or confirmed, then it should be treated as a serious crime threatening peace on the Korean Peninsula and national security, requiring a swift and strict investigation. The Blue House also did put out a second statement, I guess, to show to what extent they're very concerned, and they said that the government has no intention to provoke or irritate the North and pledged to continue practical measures and efforts to ease the tensions between the two sides. This also reached the National Security Advisor, Lee Sung-rak, who also reiterated that neither the government nor the military carried out these operations. So I think this investigation took a dramatic turn over the past few days, actually, when a man in his 30s came forward claiming to have been the operator of this drone. He went on TV in an interview and claimed responsibility. Apparently, the reason was to measure radiation, heavy metal contamination from a uranium facility in North Korea. And now media are reporting that him and another suspect were former staff members of the presidential office under Yoon Suk-yeol. So a lot of facts and stories coming out over the past few days.
Right, it is a developing story as we speak. Professor Kim, I wonder, what are your takeaways from South Korea's response to North Korea's accusations of drone incursions?
Well, overall, I think the South Korean government handled this situation pretty smoothly. North Korea came out with some very harsh language, accusing us of sending these drones across the border. But, if you look at those pictures you just showed to us, it's quite clear that these weren't really military-grade drones. They looked more like civilian-made ones, not something our government would deploy. And as we said many times, if it turns out these were civilian drones from South Korea, we will investigate. And then we will share the findings with you guys, North Koreans. I think that should help clear up the misunderstanding. Now, if Pyongyang keeps criticizing, I don't think we should be overly submissive. Let's not forget that North Korea has sent military drones into our territory before, several times, as a matter of fact, some even flying dangerously close to the presidential office. So what can we do now? I think we can propose dialogue. Hey, let's sit down and then talk about this. Let's figure out, ways in which we can prevent further drone incursions on both sides. Honestly, I don't expect North Korea to agree to this kind of talk, but at least it shows we are willing to engage constructively. I think that's the responsible stance we can take at this stage.
Right, and perhaps the reason why Professor Kim believes North Korea may not agree to dialogue is because North Korea's Kim Yo-jong, the sister of its leader Kim Jong-un, recently also took time to trample on South Korea's hopes of repairing relations by referring to them as, and I quote, wild dreams. Could you give us some context behind these comments and perhaps their potential purpose?
Yeah, so Kim Yo-jong did issue a sharp rebuke after South Korean officials interpreted her earlier statements as potentially opening space for dialogue. She basically dismissed everything, saying that any hopes of improved inter-Korean relations are delusional fantasies. Again, language that we're not too unfamiliar with these days. Her statement came in direct response to comments from South Korea's Ministry of Unification, which basically said something in the lines of that they believed that there was room for communication and détente based on what they characterized as Kim Yo-jong's somewhat moderated tone regarding the drone incident. So she said, basically, in conclusion, it has already gone wrong in their expectation as far as Seoul's various hope-filled wild dreams called repair for DPRK-ROK relations are concerned. They all can never come true. She took a particular aim at President Lee Jae-myung as well, towards his diplomatic activities, stating that the chief executive is so busy with his solicitation, diplomatic abroad solicitation, and the authorities are going so earnest to pretend that they want to show goodwill, harboring a daydream, but the present address of DPRK-ROK relations can never change. The statement demanded concrete actions, obviously, rather than an expression of the goodwill. And she insisted that Seoul admit and apologize that there have been some violations of sovereignty when it comes to these drones. And she did mention, I think 1 or 2 times, that yes, these might have been civilian, but who cares? An incursion is an incursion. Doesn't matter where it comes from. And if you want to see what civilians can do in North Korea, then we'll show you what we can do. Of course, we remember last year or a year and a half ago when we had these balloons filled with rubbish coming from North Korea, and those were apparently done by civilians in North Korea. So I think that's hinting at what could possibly happen later on. I think the purpose appears to be shutting down any narrative that Pyongyang might be softening its stance, whilst establishing perhaps some preconditions for engagement that essentially requires Seoul to accept responsibility for these incidents and ultimately apologize for them.
This being said then, Professor Kim, speaking as a scholar, what are your thoughts with regard to North Korea's bellicose rhetoric? I mean, why do you believe is the regime opting for hostility despite the open overtures of peace by the Lee Jae-myung administration here?
I think there are a lot of reasons behind North Korea's hostile rhetoric here, but the most important one is this, I think. The regime knows that any kinds of exchanges with South Korea, whether it's humanitarian aid, cultural exchanges, even tourism, any of these could actually endanger their grip on power. Even during the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, Yoon Suk-yeol government, Seoul made clear that we are very open to those kinds of exchanges, regardless of the political condition. We can do humanitarian aids and so on and so forth. But it fell, deaf ears on Pyongyang. Pyongyang understands that if ordinary North Koreans get even a glimpse of how well off South Korea has become, they will start questioning how badly they have been treated by their own regime. That's a real threat to the North Korean system. So instead of opening up, the North shut down communication channels and push this idea of so-called two hostile states. Now the Lee government is also launching a charm offensive to North Koreans, signaling openness to dialogue and so on and so forth. But from what we were seeing, Pyongyang wants to make sure that that doesn't happen. They'd rather keep the hostility going than risk exposing their people to the reality of life in the South.
Right. Professor Kim, you referred to it as a charm offensive. What do you suppose then is the significance of South Korea maintaining its accommodating stance toward North Korea despite its tough talk?
Yeah, but I think it's still very important for South Korea to keep an accommodating stance. In many ways, we are, South Korea is like a big brother here. We are like 10th largest economy in the world. We are a free country. We are militarily stronger. Of course, North Korea, on the other hand, has nuclear weapons, but overall, we are militarily stronger. The only advantage they have, as I said, is nuclear weapons. But still, they are very desperate. So we don't need to go down on their level. When they go low, I think we should go high. That's how we maintain the moral high ground here. That's why I think it's important for us to keep asking for dialogue, even though it's clear they will reject it. But by doing so, we should show the world that we are the responsible actor here. That said, if they cross the line, if they encroach on our defense posture or our core defense interests, then we have to be stern. In those cases, a more disciplined so-called tit-for-tat approach is necessary, in my personal opinion. But the default stance should be accommodation, because that's how we keep the upper hand and morally and strategically.
Right. Perhaps then as part of efforts of taking the high ground, Unification Minister Chung Dong-young, Raphael, has called for proactive diplomacy between North Korea and the US while speaking at a second meeting of the Korean Peninsula Peace Strategy Advisory Group. For the sake of our viewers who may not be aware of this particular group, do tell us a little about it and what exactly he said.
Yeah, so this advisory group is a consultative body comprising inter-Korean experts that advises the Unification Ministry on peace strategy. And this particular meeting brought together 16 specialists, including former Unification Ministers Jung Se-hyun and Kim Yeon-chol. The current minister, Jung Dong-young, he stated that to make this year the first year of peaceful coexistence on the Korean Peninsula, we must build on the outcomes of the South Korea-China and South Korea-Japan summits to drive a North Korea-US summit by connecting them to the US-China summit in April. Of course, Trump has said that he will be going to Beijing in April, and so I think there's some kind of hopes that somehow he might meet Kim Jong-un somewhere along the lines, maybe in China or even at the border. The minister described the period leading to President Trump's planned visit in April as a decisive moment for building a peace, calling what the ministry termed proactive and creative efforts to help realize this US-North Korea summit talks that everyone is hoping will happen. So I think basically the participants at this meeting are suggested expanding high-level communication with neighboring countries, of course, to support the peace initiatives in the region, on the peninsula at least. And they also discussed ways to leverage what they termed indirect communication, established through even the drone incident exchanges as potential pathway to restore these inter-Korean communication channels that have been severed over the past few years, really. So I think my takeaway is that Minister Jung is essentially positioning South Korea as a facilitator rather than waiting passively for great powers to determine the peninsula's future, attempting to create diplomatic momentum by linking separate bilateral achievements into broader strategic framework.
Right, especially since the President spoke about becoming a pacemaker. Right, I'm afraid on that note we'll have to end today's talk. Thank you so much, Raphael, for your time and thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights today. Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.